Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got chapter 6 of Sun Tzu's The Art of War lined up today, based on what you shared. It's titled Weak Points and Strong.
Right. And this chapter, it really gets into the nitty-gritty of identifying vulnerabilities, leveraging your own advantages.
So the goal here is to take these, well, ancient military principles and see what they mean for us today, right?
Mm,
For the kinds of challenges, maybe technical or otherwise, that our listeners might be tackling.
precisely. How can understanding weak points and strong points, in Sun Tzu's terms, help us think strategically about modern problems? That's the mission.
Okay, let's dive in. The fundamental principle seems pretty clear. In war, the way is to avoid what is strong and to strike at what is weak. Sounds logical enough.
It is, but the key is understanding what strong and weak really mean here. It's not just about, sheer numbers or brute force.
So what kind of weakness are we talking about then, beyond just, say, fewer soldiers?
Well, it could be anything, really. Maybe a lack of preparation, a poorly chosen position, even low morale, or a blind spot in their strategy.
Ah, okay, so it's about identifying any vulnerability.
Exactly. And focusing your efforts there where you can make a real impact. You avoid confronting them where they have a clear advantage, where they're dug in.
That makes sense. You're looking for the strategic opening, not just charging straight ahead. Can you give us a more modern example? How does this play out away from a literal battlefield?
Sure. Think about business competition. A smaller company, maybe a startup, usually doesn't try to take on a huge corporation head-to-head on their main product line, right?
No, that'd be tough.
Right. Instead, they might target a niche market the big guys are ignoring. That's striking at a weak point, an area that's underserved or undefended.
Or maybe in personal projects, like focusing on a skill where there isn't much competition yet, or where you already have some kind of edge.
Exactly that. You're finding where your effort yields the most return by targeting a relative weakness, either in the opponent or the situation itself. It's about efficiency and maximizing impact.
Okay, so that's reacting to existing weaknesses. But Sun Tzu also talks about creating weak points in the enemy. That sounds, well, more aggressive, more proactive.
It is, and this is where strategy gets really dynamic. Sun Tzu says something like, being able to adapt your tactics based on the enemy and winning because of it. That's like divine skill.
Heavenly born, I think the translation says.
Yeah, that's it. It implies that real mastery isn't just following a plan. It's about, reading the situation, understanding the opponent's tendencies, and then making openings.
So how do you make an opening? It involves intelligence, I guess, knowing what the opponent is up to.
Absolutely. Observation, information gathering, which, hints at chapter 3 on spies, something we'll get to later, and being flexible. Adaptability is key.
And what specific tactics does he mention for creating these vulnerabilities?
He gives a few good ones. One is making a show of weakness yourself, lulling the enemy into a false sense of security so they lower their guard. Deception, basically, which is a huge theme.
Okay, feign weakness. What else?
Creating diversions. Make noise over here to draw their forces away from where you actually plan to strike. Classic misdirection.
Makes sense. Draw their attention away.
And then, crucially, attacking undefended spots, moving fast, hitting them where they aren't prepared
Right.
before they even realize what's happening, exploiting the gaps you find or create.
Can we see these tactics used today? Outside of the military, I mean.
Oh, definitely. Think about cybersecurity. Attackers, they don't usually try to smash through the main firewall of a really secure system, do they?
No, they look for flaws.
Exactly. They probe for weaknesses, maybe unpatched software, a vulnerability in some connected app, or, even tricking an employee with a phishing email. They exploit the undefended point.
That's a good parallel. What about something like negotiation?
Sure. In a negotiation, you might try to figure out the other side's biggest pressures. Like, what are their deadlines? Who are they accountable to? Those are potential weak points.
And then you use that information.
Right. You might subtly steer the conversation towards topics where they seem less prepared, or maybe emphasize aspects that play into their known pressures. You're sort of creating a weak point by shifting the ground.
Okay, so we're looking for weaknesses, even creating them. But you mentioned earlier it's also about our own strengths. How does that fit in?
That's the other half of the coin, absolutely. Sun Tzu points out, the spot where we intend to fight must not be made known. Why? Because if the enemy doesn't know where you'll strike,
They have to spread their defenses thin, trying to cover everything.
precisely, they have to prepare against attacks at multiple points.
Yeah.
And that dispersion creates localized weaknesses. It means your concentrated strength can potentially overwhelm their diluted defense wherever you choose to focus.
So keep your plans secret, concentrate your force. That's the idea.
That's a huge part of it. Concentration of force is powerful. Think about developing skills again. If you become a true master in one specific valuable area.
You're more effective than being mediocre in lots of areas.
Exactly. That focused strength gives you a significant advantage in situations that call for that expertise. Or, in managing a project, you put your best people, your core strength, on the most critical tasks to ensure success there.
The secrecy thing, keeping your plans hidden, it links to another concept he mentions, the illusion of formlessness. What's that about? Being unpredictable.
Yeah, pretty much. Sun Tzu states, our military disposition should be without form. Basically, predictability is a strategic death sentence. If your opponent knows your patterns, your standard moves.
They can counter you easily.
Right. So by being adaptable, fluid, not sticking to one rigid approach, you make yourself hard to read, hard to anticipate, hard to defend against effectively.
Being without form sounds a bit abstract, though. How does that look in practice today?
Well, think about agile methods in software development or even project management. The whole point is flexibility, right? Responding to change rather than sticking rigidly to an initial plan.
Yeah, iterative cycles, adapting as you go.
That inherent adaptability makes it really hard for competitors with more traditional locked-in plans to keep up or effectively counter their moves. It's kind of organizational formlessness.
Any other examples?
Maybe even in creative problem solving. If you always approach a problem the same way, you get stuck. Frameworks, stay flexible in your thinking. That's being formless in your approach. You're not predictable.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, Sun Tzu also talks about assessing relative strength in a slightly counterintuitive way. He says something like, numerical weakness comes from having to prepare against attacks.
And numerical strength comes from compelling your adversary to make those preparations against you. Yeah, it's a bit of a twist.
What's the takeaway there? It sounds like perception matters as much as reality.
It really does. It highlights the psychological game of strategy. It's not just about who has more stuff, more troops, more resources. It's about who dictates the terms of engagement, who forces the other side to react.
So making your opponent think you might attack everywhere forces them to spread out, which actually weakens them overall.
Exactly. If you can project strength, or even just uncertainty about your intentions, you compel them to waste resources guarding against possibilities, maybe threats that aren't even real. You control the tempo. You make them reactive.
So even if you're technically weaker in numbers or resources, you can gain an advantage by playing this psychological game, forcing them to overextend.
That's the idea. Think about a market leader. Sometimes they can influence smaller competitors just by hinting at a new product launch or entering a new market segment.
Even if they don't actually do it.
Sometimes, yeah. The threat is enough to make smaller players divert resources, maybe hold back on their own plans just in case. It's using perceived strength to force the opponent's hand.
We keep circling back to it, but deception seems absolutely central to this whole chapter, doesn't it? Creating weak points, exploiting them, being formless.
It really is. You can't separate these ideas from deception. Sun Tzu explicitly says a skilled commander maintains deceitful appearances, according to which the enemy will act. You shape their perception of reality to your advantage.
Like those historical examples mentioned elsewhere, Tzu or Sun Pin pretending to retreat to lure enemies into a trap.
Exactly. Those are classic examples of feigning weakness, using deception to create a vulnerability the enemy pursues recklessly and then exploiting it.
And in the modern world, besides cybersecurity or negotiation?
Well, think about marketing and advertising. Companies work hard to create a certain perception of their product or brand, right? Highlighting strengths, maybe glossing over weaknesses, positioning against competitors. That's all about shaping perception.
Influencing how the opponent, the consumer in this case, acts.
Precisely. It's about creating a narrative that encourages the desired action.
Okay. Another concept Sun Tzu brings up is the momentum of organized strength. He uses that image of rolling logs or stones. What's the point there?
Yeah, that's a powerful analogy. When he utilizes combined energy, his fighting men become, as it were, like unto rolling logs or stones. It's about the sheer unstoppable force generated by a cohesive, well-directed group.
So teamwork makes the dream work, but with more. Crushing force.
That's something like that. It's about discipline, unity of effort, and channeling that collective energy towards a clear objective. A team working in perfect sync, with everyone understanding their role and the goal, creates this momentum that's hard to stop.
Much more effective than a bunch of individuals pulling in different directions.
Infinitely more effective. That organized combined energy can overcome significant obstacles, just like a heavy stone rolling downhill gathers force. It's about organizational effectiveness and focus.
Got it. And finally, the chapter briefly touches on terrain, although that's really chapter X's focus. How does terrain link to weak and strong points?
Even here, it's clear Sun Tzu sees terrain as a modifier. Good ground can become a strong point, allowing a smaller force to hold off a larger one. Bad ground can expose weaknesses, make you vulnerable.
So the environment itself can create or amplify strengths and weaknesses.
Absolutely. Understanding the terrain, whether literal ground or the market landscape or the project environment, is crucial for identifying where strengths can be leveraged and where vulnerabilities might lie. It's another factor in the strategic equation.
Okay, so wrapping up chapter 6. The big message seems to be this constant interplay. Assess yourself, assess the challenge or opponent, find or create the weak spots, concentrate your strengths, be adaptable, and use deception wisely. It's very dynamic.
It really is. It's not a static checklist. It's a way of thinking strategically, always asking, where's the vulnerability? Where can my strength be most effectively applied? Am I being predictable? It's about finding that asymmetric advantage.
Definitely gives you a different framework for looking at problems. So what's next? We're heading into chapter 7, maneuvering. What should we expect there?
Chapter 7 gets much more into the how of conducting operations, you could say. It talks about the practical challenges of moving forces, the dangers of direct drawn-out conflict, and the importance of, well, maneuvering to gain advantage before the actual clash.
So less about the static assessment of points, more about movement and positioning.
Exactly. We'll look at things like the risks of long supply lines, the need to sometimes take indirect routes, the importance of concentrating forces at the right time and place, and even the psychology of troops in different situations, like when they're desperate.
Sounds like it builds directly on understanding weak and strong points, but focuses on how you exploit them through movement and timing.
Precisely. It's about translating strategic insight into effective action on the ground. And the question for us will be, again, how do these ideas about skillful movement, avoiding costly delays, and understanding psychological pressures apply to complex projects or goals we face today?
Looking forward to it. Thanks for breaking down chapter 6.
My pleasure. Lots to think about there.
Absolutely. And thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope thinking about Sun Tzu's weak points and strong gives you some fresh perspectives on your own challenges. Join us next time as we tackle the art of maneuvering in chapter 7.